Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 5 of Barcode's Risk Radar series. Um, Today, I'm with John Michael Gross. John Michael is an experienced tech leader driving business value via strategic implementations. His diverse background across engineering, operations, sales, and management aligns with technology and core goals. One of his key strengths is architecting high powered, tech enabled solutions that enhance operational processes through data utilization. And as Cascade CIO slash CISO since 2017, he maximizes impact through his passion for performance improvement. John Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Boy, I should have you write my copy. That's a great intro.
Absolutely, more than happy to. Okay, so as I mentioned in the intro, you wear, both the CIO and the CISO hats at a mid-sized firm. So I'm just curious, what are the biggest challenges that you face in balancing the priorities and responsibilities between both of those critical roles, and how do you strive to meet or even outperform expectations given your limited resources?
Could I say, lack of sleep or paranoia? Like those would be the two biggest challenges right there. I guess those are more personal, not really what you're looking for.
It's a side effect, though,
Yeah,
for
so I
sure.
definitely a side effect. I think, really being hyper aware that the two roles are in conflict with each other at some level, and there needs to be a balance between them. Admitting you have a problem is the first step to solving that problem. Um, I think really that's kind of the case with all tech. I mean, ultimately, we don't do technology for technology's sake. We do it because there's a business impact or there's a social impact or whatever it is we're doing. So in my case, thinking about the technology and cybersecurity, those two hats, ultimately I answer to the business. I mean, every dollar I spend has to come from my folks going out and earning those dollars so I can spend them. So ultimately, every solution I bring to bear has to have, a business need for what's there. So I think probably the biggest way that helps me find the balance between them is making sure that I've done the analysis that this is a great tech solution, this is a great cyber solution, and that the business buys into that as well. Because ultimately, if they like what's there, then I feel like I've got some confidence that I've got a balance between those. Um,
And
I
you
think,
have an advantage to sort of understand the approach and the terminology between the 2 sides, right? That helps you get that message across.
well, certainly it does, and I think I think I think I've gotten better at it. I would say people who knew me in the past would say you didn't know that very well. You're more of a tech person than a business person. I think speaking just for Cascade specifically, and there have been other places, but Cascade has a great executive team, and frankly, they keep me on my toes. I mean, they don't live in the world of analyzing the cybersecurity or the technology, but they are genuinely interested in the value that we're bringing to operations or HR or finance. And so, they keep me honest in those things. So they really try to partner with me from the standpoint of, you know, maybe not doing all the analysis in those pieces, but really saying, I want to understand how this is going to impact my area of the business in a positive way. And ultimately, if they push back and I haven't done the due diligence or haven't done the analysis the way that I needed to, I can go back to the drawing board. But if I have done that or my team has done that, then they buy into that and they're big supporters of that. So I think that's a big part of what makes that successful for us.
When you're the CIO or the CISO, um, there are some key decisions that carry very high stakes that could, significantly impact the organization as a whole. Um, I'm just curious, having that dual role and that leadership and that power, if you will, how do you approach that decision making process in an organization of your side? And if you could talk through sort of the factors that go into that evaluation process.
I think the first part for me is really starting with the fact that I don't know everything. And again, that might be a change from early on in my career. I grew up as a developer, and developers are somewhat notorious for, my code's the best, or I've done everything that I need to do, and all of that. Um, so with maturity, I think starting there, and so really for me, investing in building a network of CIOs and CISOs, both at mid market and enterprise level, that I can reach out to, learn from their mistakes, learn from their successes. I that is probably the biggest driver of my success, I think, in terms of having people expand my network, expand my capabilities, if you will. But getting back to maybe an actual decision, I think the first thing that I do is I ask myself, am I enamored with this shiny solution in front of me because it's brand new and it's great, and it's going to solve every problem because I read the marketing literature and everything else like that. But taking that and going back to what we talked about before, is it going to benefit the business? Is it going to increase revenue, lower cost, make for greater efficiency, mitigate risk? It really depends on what side that's there. So, the I guess I would call it the why question. Why are we doing this, as opposed to just being enamored with something? And then I think the second thing that I've really started to do much more is to ask myself, what is the cost to the change of the organization? Sometimes it can seem like a great solution on paper, but compared to what we do today, or what solution we have in place today, maybe the users, maybe I'm going to slow down the operations of the users with this great new technology or this great new cybersecurity.
Mm.
Think about MFA when we implemented that. We were fairly early adopters for company-wide MFA, and in doing so, it was like, well, our users are going to suddenly have to do this every time they log in and do things, and so there was a balance of risk versus operational cost for doing that. So, and then I think the last part, at a high level that we evaluate is what's the sustaining engineering cost of running the solution. I mean, it's great to go out and buy something. It's great to build something, but ultimately you're going to be living with that solution for a long period of time. So, or you're going to have an additional head come in and work.
Yeah.
Or you're going to have to pay some maintenance cost, or you're going to have to, and continue to invest in it. So really understanding those three areas is how I sort of break down every decision that's there, and then balancing against what the business needs and what my peers say, if I can convince them it's a great solution for them.
Yeah, and on the topic of peers, I wanted to ask you, when it comes to making a decision on, let's say, technology or technology solutions, one trend that we tend to see here with the mid-sized firms is that it's very community driven, and being able to work with your peers and talk with your peers about what has worked for them, what doesn't work for them. Um, do you find value in that? Is there a community around your industry that you can candidly share that information, to help you make those decisions?
Yeah, definitely. I think when I started, I sort of felt like I was a little bit on an island, because I would talk to certain peers or see some report from a large established reporting firm. I don't know if you want to use names on this or names on this or not, Chris, but
No,
um,
we can just, yeah, we'll just keep it at that.
yeah, keep it at that. But I think I ended up going to an event from the channel company, the Midsize Enterprise Summit, which
Mhm.
um, I'll be honest, I wasn't quite sure what to believe, because they said, look, we'll pay for you to come down and you'll network with your peers and you'll see some solutions and you don't have to buy anything, which sounds a little bit too good to be true when you think about it. But the reality is, I got there and I found, 120 other CIOs or CISOs at their security conference that had the same problems I had. They didn't have the budget. They didn't have the bandwidth. They were sort of thinker doers in their roles. A lot of CIOs and CISOs in this space are still pretty hands on compared to maybe at the enterprise level. So I think building, as an example, building out that network, and being a part of that, um, it's really one of the best mid-size organizations that I've come across. And in fact, I eventually ended up joining the advisory board for them, just so I could help shape the content a little bit and really, be there and get a lot out of it.
Yeah, and congrats on that, by the way. I'm really looking forward to the upcoming MES conference next month. I'll see you down there. So
Outstanding.
yeah. So your firm, it's a mid-sized firm. I think if I remember correctly, you're around 1,000 employees, 35 offices or so. Um, but when we talked last time, you were mentioning, for that size of an organization, there was some unexpectedly high traffic, high network traffic, and firewall alerts, and things that you wouldn't expect to be at such a volume at a mid-sized organization. Um, could you just confirm that I remember that correctly? And then also, if that's true, how do you manage dealing with such a large volume of potentially critical alerts, high severity alerts, without a large team to manage them?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a large volume, and let me explain where the volume comes from, because we're just under 1,000 employees and 35 locations. But you think about, we have about 100 applications that run inside of our environment. Most of our people are running some combination of phones and laptops, or my field is typically on an iPad and a phone. And so when you think about telemetry and authentication, we've been building out our zero trust network. So I think of authentication not just, you know, is that the right person connecting, but is it the right person connecting to the right application in the right geolocation that they're working? So the number of telemetry items that we have, I was a little stunned by it myself when it first came across. I mean, you would think with 1,000 people, you'd be seeing things in the tens of thousands range, but
Mhm.
really with every application and multiple authentications and going across networks, we're in the millions that come across. And so, um, lucky for us, I guess this would be a happy coincidence. We also at the same time have worked on putting things behind security brokers and really trying to simplify our security network. So that's, going back to your question, how do we combat that volume with the resources that we have or don't have? It's really about, we've simplified that, we've put it behind a broker, and so we're looking at one pane of glass. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is we've done a lot to really invest in that zero trust approach, where we know where people are supposed to be, we know when they're supposed to be on, generally speaking. We know what devices are supposed to be coming from. So when we first implemented geofencing 6-7 years ago, the first thing we did is we were looking at the logins on our network, and this was just at an AD level. I mean, we're not talking about the stuff we're doing today.
Mhm.
And 90% of the attempts to log in were coming from outside of the US. And at the time, exactly 0% of our business was being done outside of the United States. So
Interesting.
it was really easy to say, well, if we geofence this and say we block all the traffic outside of the US, what's that going to do to the telemetry and what we see? And we saw 90% reduction almost immediately. And then, of course, we saw attacks coming over VPNs soon after that, once they realized they were being geofenced out. So, I think of zero trust in my world a lot about geofencing on top of geofencing. We're going to limit your location, but then we're going to limit the devices and what's intelligent on top of that. So that's the first part in reducing that large number. The number I gave you is the total telemetry, but what we're really looking at is much smaller than that in terms of what we see. I think for us, the attitude we had when we started was very much no soup for you, thinking about the old Seinfeld approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
We very much, if you wanted to operate somewhere that was outside of our environment, we were just like, sorry, you can't do that. But my folks are on the road. We make money when we are on site doing work for clients. So for me to take a position where I'm going to say, you can't compute when you're on site, when you're
Mhm.
literally making the money that allows me to pay me to make that decision, that's part of the learning experience that they got in and said, okay, we have to come up with a better way. So that sort of
Yeah.
drove our approach.
Did
Um,
did COVID have an impact on how that was designed, or were you pretty much? Do you feel like you were set pre-COVID?
well, certainly on paper,
Mhm.
it would be. I think I said this to you before. I would be I would be lying if I said I had any inkling something like COVID would come along, and we would be well positioned for it.
Yeah.
But the reality is, going back to what I said, we have people on the road. Maybe 70% of people are on the road in our company in any given day. And when I joined the company, when you were on the road, you had no connectivity. So maybe through your phone or something, but you weren't really computing. You weren't using a laptop or doing that. So, our strategy to really extend the network to where people were, as opposed to where we defined it, perimeter defined network, if you will, I guess would be how we would describe that then.
Okay.
Um, to really expand it and get people working in hotels and homes and coffee shops. I know all these things, they raise the antenna of people who are in the cybersecurity space. But the reality is that may be where my people are working that day, at a job site, and I needed to get them connected. So we had started down a path maybe 2 years prior to COVID hitting of saying, I want people to be able to connect wherever they are in a secure fashion. I want to know who it is, make sure they're getting to the right things and doing that. And I want to do so in a way that, doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of data security and things like that.
Yeah.
The test came with COVID because it's easy to say 70% of the people are on the road every day. But the reality is they're not all connecting at the same time, because my users culturally were getting used to working remotely as well.
Mm-hmm.
When COVID hit, and the Northwest was one of the early locations for that, I guess you could say, we sent everyone home, and I probably spent 2-3 weeks looking at our secure network access solution, saying, is it going to keel over? I'm used to seeing a couple hundred on here. What's going to happen when we see, much larger numbers? And so fortuitously, it all worked out. And
You couldn't really replicate that
no,
prior to that happening.
no, definitely not. Other than saying everybody go home. But, I think the employees would love me if I said that. I think my boss would probably tell me, no, that's not a good strategy. So,
Right. Well, you've been with your company for a while, and you didn't start out in cybersecurity at the organization, so you got to see the evolution and then have a hand in that as well. So, what experience or incident specifically made you truly recognize cybersecurity's importance there? And I guess what were the biggest lessons that you took away from that?
I think, I thought about, is there a specific incident that caused me to say this is important? Because I probably was like a lot of other IT people in that, just good enough security, if you will, or, we'll do the standard things, but, MFA on everything, boy, that seems like a reach, things that we used to say. We don't say that now, but we used to say those things. So I think it was probably the rise of cyber attacks as a service when we started to see BEC become like marketing material. And I think, prior to that time, before these services were available, I think we all viewed cyber attacks as really two groups of folks: the really skilled hackers, and then maybe the script kiddies, I guess we'd call them. And we weren't really worried about the script kiddies because their stuff wasn't very sophisticated and it was really easy to spot. And I would say we really had a pretty good idea of the means and methods for the highest risk attacks from the really skilled folks. And so I think we all professionally had a pretty good defensive strategy to deal with that. But in the rise of, with the rise of, hacking as a service, if you will, that really changed. And I think if I had to put it to an incident, for me, the change when it came when was probably a BEC email compromise. And again, going back to that no soup for you analogy I used before, my old IT self would have said, come on, you should have seen this. This is, clearly you didn't order this from Amazon or whatever it was. But, when I really talked to the person, I think it was their sense of, embarrassment, their sense of personal violation that they were impersonated, and, maybe having some empathy for their position, that I started to say to myself, okay, look, we caught this, or, maybe in a particular case, they gave a gift card away of $100 or something. But the reality is that empathy caused me to say, I need to rethink how we're approaching cybersecurity, because We deal with this every day. We generally walk around like long-tailed cats in a room full of rocking chairs, right? That's cybersecurity in its very nature. But I think that um, the normal people, if you will, if we're not normal in this space, the normal people, they don't think about this stuff,
Yeah.
and they want to be secure, they want to help, but they just don't even know, where the next vector is coming from to attack them. So I think having some empathy as opposed to being more punitive. I mean, you're seeing that in sort of, the human risk management things. It's less punitive now, more about encouragement and gamification and things. I think once that happened for us, that really started to change my overall approach for recognizing the importance of cybersecurity. Um, from that, I started to really develop a sense of trying to explain to people less in technical terms. This is how quickly they can breach you. This is how quickly they can get your information. To start to describe to people, have you thought about, let's take your phone. How many pieces of personal information that you would not want shared with people are in your phone? It's bank account information, it's health information, it's all of those. And people start thinking about that in their hands and start going, well, I guess cybersecurity should matter to me now, right? It started to help them develop some sense of that. So I think the biggest lesson for me in the early stuff really would have been changing from, we're just going to be secure for security's sake because it's the right thing to do. And, there, I really had eliminated the human element. So having some empathy for what people are going through, and that has helped, I think, getting people to buy into, okay, we should use a password keeper and share with our family, and all these other things that are out there. So that probably was the biggest change for me.
Yeah. Recognizing that that need extends beyond the organization.
Right.
I think that's really the end game, is to just get them consciously thinking about security.
Right.
Um, So, from your perspective, again, you have that dual role perspective. What advice would you give to other leadership? Let's say CISOs now, maybe in the mid market space, that need to get their leadership buy-in, and then help prioritize cybersecurity initiatives. Having both of those perspectives, do you have any advice there for maybe CISOs that have to get that message across?
I think the biggest thing, and I think about my organization and how the rest of my team works with me, it's less about buy-in and more about partnership. It's spending time in their shoes, understanding, it's easy to say we should do this because it's the right thing to do. Think about, again, the MFA example,
Hmm.
but understanding what the operational impact of that would be only came by speaking with my operational leaders, whether it's being out in the field or being out with being in my offices or even talking with the other executives. So I think buy-in is really about understanding that it's not just technology, it's not just cybersecurity, it's the business impact. And you have to understand the business impact, not from our perspective as CISOs and CIOs, but from their perspective running their business. Um, I think we would expect the same if somebody said, "Oh, I want to buy all of my people laptops from some reputable store and just hand them out to people. I don't want them to be managed and Intune. That's extra dollars. So we can do this cheaper." We would want to be a partner in that conversation and explain why we don't want to do it. So I think it's important for us to understand we can't just be technologists and cybersecurity folks first, is that we also have to understand their business, really to the extent that, we go to school. And I like to think when I go out into the field, when I'm asking the question, how do we do this? And trust me, my drillers wouldn't let me near one of our rigs because, they're PhDs in what they do. And I'm literally an idiot when it comes to that stuff. But they will take the time to explain what they're doing and explain why they do it. And so, you know, when we wanted to put something out in the field, it seemed sensical. I think probably you and I carry a phone around all day long. It would be dangerous for our employees to have a phone out while they're working on a drilling rig, for
Gotcha.
example. So understanding that maybe what I think is a good idea, I'll just get your phone out and do this, doesn't make sense for them because it would be a safety hazard. It would be something. And I wouldn't know that if I hadn't listened to them. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is really on paper, everything looks good. we could certainly go into our favorite language learning model and say, generate 5 slides on what's really important about cybersecurity for small business. But it's really important that the people that we're going to be pitching this to, if you will, going to the buy-in and looking for that partnership, they don't do this at a professional level. So they don't live with this day in and day out. So it's important to really help them understand what the risk levels are and what's there. Using that phone example I used before. I
Mhm.
think if you put up a one picture slide of every piece of data that was at risk on a phone, most people would look at their phone and say, whoa, how do I get a 6-digit passcode on this as opposed to 4-digit? And is it really secure? They wouldn't think of it as what's there,
Yeah.
for that. So, I think when we went back to talking to our employees about improving their passwords many years ago, um, they were like, "Oh, I have a good enough password." But when I started talking about, well, eventually everybody's going to get breached on some level, whether it's through no fault of your own because you were working with some retailer that got breached, or maybe you gave your credentials to somebody.
Mhm.
And I started trying to get my colleagues to understand what's your blast radius. I mean, we talk in terms like that as cybersecurity people, but getting the employees to understand that's there. So I think a little bit of it is understanding that if you want to be a partner with your business, you truly have to be a partner. And sometimes that means speaking in terms that they're comfortable with and familiar with. I also think it means really truly understanding what they're trying to accomplish, not just what we're trying to accomplish as professionals. So I feel like those are, some of the other things. And I think, the last part, and I'll just say thank you for putting together this podcast, looking for mid-market peers. As I said, there was a time when I felt like I was a little bit on an island because I didn't have the money for, I think I was talking with someone who said, I only have 35 people on my security team. And I'm like, oh, that's just tragic. I don't know how you survive with 35 people. I don't have 35 people on my team as a whole across the entire organization.
Yeah.
So understanding that there are others in the same space, and my experience through podcasts like yours and events like you were talking about before, we're trying to help each other. I mean, we've built and we're building a great community. And I think that's you know, our peers should be looking for things like this to partner up on and contribute to.
Yeah, and I want to thank you, John Michael, for joining and sharing your knowledge and contributing to hopefully helping other folks in the same situation find some answers. Um, where can our listeners find and connect with you and know more about your organization?
Well, Cascade Environmental is our company. As I say, it's a really cool business that people don't really think of as a cool business. So easy to reach me on LinkedIn or find us at Cascade Environmental on the web. And my contact information is up there. So
Awesome.
easy enough to get me. Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah, thank you guys, and thanks everyone for joining and tuning in. And we'll see you next time. Take care.